In this show that is all about 90s nostalgia, one question that we have thus far failed to address is, what did nostalgia look like in the 90s? Although I disdained the whole sentiment of romanticizing the past when I was younger, which I believe was a popular stance at the time, I did take notice of any entertainment that seemed to be playing on people's fonder memories. Dazed and Confused, that 70s show. Later on, there was The Wedding Singer, a movie from 1998 about how silly the year 1985 was. But for the most part, there didn't seem to be that big of a nostalgia industry back then. Nothing close to what we have now, at least. In fact, if there's one decade that people seemed to be obsessed with during the 90s, it was the 90s. We spent a lot of time reminding each other what decade it was. It's the 90s, get with the program. Or like, hello, it's the 90s, we don't do that anymore. Was there ever another decade that so actively mythologized itself even as it was unfolding? It may just seem like a case of generational vanity, but something about our shared knowledge that it was in fact the 90s made the decade feel somehow momentous in a way that other decades apparently weren't. After all, 90 is the highest decade. After that, you have to start over again from zero. And sure, all of these numbers are completely arbitrary and there's no way of knowing what year we're really in. But still, that's the kind of milestone that can provoke a lot of existential unease. Did you know more people joined death cults during the 90s than during any other decade? I think that's part of the reason why it's so hard to be nostalgic about the 90s. We spent the entire decade acting as though nostalgia itself was over. With the Cold War behind us and a severely overestimated sense of stability starting to set in, there was a palpable feeling of having left a misguided and destructive period of history behind us. As if we were now living in Voltaire's best of all possible worlds. There was no reason, we assumed, to ever look back. Yeah, we were drunk on our own hubris, but if you weren't there at the time, you can't know what it felt like. Still, nostalgia has a way of being timeless. There's always going to be somebody who misses the way that things were, even if it's just one guy. Well, in 1994, that one guy was Ahmad, a man who I like to think of as the Marcel Proust of 90s G-Funk. Ahmad was a rapper from South Central LA who shot all the way up to number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 with the remix of his debut single, Back in the Day.
Back in the days when I was young, I'm not a kid anymore, but some days I sit and wish I was a kid again.
This song is the quintessential nostalgia trip of the 90s. And just listen to that groove built on a sample from Love TKO by Teddy Pendergrass. That's some deep, soulful throwback funk. And it creates the perfect backdrop for Ahmad to lay down some wistful, relatable memories. Even if, like me, you weren't sure exactly what he was talking about half the time.
Basket weaves, Nike Cortez and footsie socks, and eating pickles with Tootsie Pops, and it don't stop.
Over this sturdy groove, Ahmad laces a hook that is equal parts melodic and infectious, and evokes a sense of universality, without sacrificing any of the specific, lovingly rendered, almost painterly detail in his coming-of-age story.
I'm not a kid anymore, but some days I sit and wish I was a kid. And everybody say, I remember way back when.
I mean, who doesn't want to be a kid again, right? Yet the precocious confidence and lyrical facility he displays on this album belie his youth, and imbues his storytelling with real passion and credibility. I mean, this song just sounds like it was consciously crafted to be heard and appreciated years after the fact, even while it describes experiences from a much earlier time. Ahmad was born Ahmad Ali Lewis in Los Angeles, California. According to a 2009 interview with Stanford magazine, he grew up across the street from a crack house. And yet he was able to navigate such a dangerous environment by focusing on his positive goals and aspirations. Perhaps it was this early inspiration that stayed with him through the years, even while his music career fizzled, and prevented him from being another casualty of the record industry meat grinder. Ahmad's first commercially released track was the song Who Can? From the 1993 black superhero comedy The Meteor Man, aka the Black Panther of the 90s.
Kick it up and away, back to the ghetto where it started, to start up change, get rid of city gang.
According to music critic Robert Christgau, Ahmad was discovered as a teenager by Stefan Kendall Gordy, son of Motown founder Berry Gordy, and I shit you not, member of the early 2010s party rap novelty act LMFAO.
Party, 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 party.
Christgau writes that Gordy met Ahmad when the latter was bused from South Central to a high school in Pacific Palisades, and they struck up a friendship. Soon enough, Gordy's family business music connections helped Ahmad to get his self-titled album released in 1994 on Giant and Reprise Records, when he was still only 18 years old. Were it not for his chance encounter with the son of a big-shot music executive, there's no telling how long it would have otherwise taken for Ahmad's career to get going, if ever. Yet on his debut, Ahmad showcases a mature and compelling grasp of tightly controlled rap styles and storytelling language, proving he could more than hold his own on the microphone with any number of already successful rappers. While at the same time, his undeniable sense of humor and playfulness set him apart from the mainstream during a time when the general mood of hip-hop was becoming darker and more street-oriented than it ever had before. AllMusic compares his flow to Fat Lip from the Far Side, which for your reference was a rapper who sounded like this.
My dear, you do not know me, but I know you very well. Now let me tell you about the feelings I've been for you when I try.
Even in the one song where he indulges in typical drugs and crime-related rap scenarios, it turns out that the whole song was just a cautionary tale about some wannabe who only held up a liquor store because he was peer-pressured into it by the real hardcore thugs in his neighborhood and ends up getting shot.
I didn't do it quick enough, or he thought of it first, cause he blasted to the chest and now I'm resting, yelling nurse.
Now there were a number of rappers at the time who attempted to provide an alternative to the already cliched gangsta styles, to varying degrees of success. But there is still a conscious effort to represent his people and his hood in a positive light, and to try to show the world that there was more to the inner city experience than the deadly cycles of violence, poverty, and substance abuse that had been running rampant for years. His raps are introspective and layered, with a strong sense of beyond his years wisdom, putting him more in league with contemporary underground rappers like Common and Mos Def.
And to those of you who get rich quick, it's trouble where the homies live at, so don't forget to give back.
The one aspect of the album that I think betrays his youth and lack of experience is the fact that a lot of the songs just go on for way too long. Sometimes the verses will end and the track will just keep going, running in place, almost as if someone forgot to turn off the record button. I think what makes Back in the Day such a powerful song, besides being a lot more concise than some of his other songs, is that it juxtaposes a severely disadvantaged early life with the sense of joy and wonder that a child can find in even the most dire of circumstances.
Play hide and go get it with the younger hoes, by the bungalows, then switch to playing ding dong ditch.
Of course, in the remix, this comes across a lot better, since the Teddy Pendergrass sample is shot through with a deep sense of melancholy. The original version is almost too cheery, and undermines the feeling of light shining through the darkness that Ahmad was continually attempting to project.
When that gets old and too cold to hack it, threw on a bomber jacket, you can tell the ballers cause they bell wearing gazelles.
Rap as a whole seems to be a genre that is expressly concerned with making the most of your limitations. Can't sing? Screw it, just pick up a mic and come up with some rhymes. Don't have access to proper equipment? Pick up an 808 and figure out how to use it. Trouble coming up with beats? Take a sample from some awesome old song and build on it. Ahmad embodies this attitude with his acknowledgement that although life can be rough, you can always find something to celebrate, even in the most mundane experiences.
Ordinary people make the world turn. I learned that if you work hard in life, then it counts the way the balls bounce.
There's almost a youthful naivete to how Ahmad describes his experiences, though it could just as well be the exuberance inherent in reliving memories from childhood and reflecting on just how far you've come. Though the experiences described in the song harken back to a bygone era, he sounds very in the moment as he's describing it, almost as if it happened just yesterday, which it pretty much had.
Well, it's a morning. I figure that now I'm all grown up because I'm 18 years old.
While it's true that 18 is way too young to be considering yourself a grown-up, it almost seems earned in this context. Ahmad does come off as something of an old soul here, someone who has clearly been through a lot and yet approaches the uncertain future with a sense of openness and hope. And it's a good thing he did, because I'm willing to guess the future direction his career ended up taking was somewhat unexpected, to put it mildly. The reasons as to why Ahmad was unable to build on the runaway success of his hit single are murky and perhaps manifold. Despite reaching number 19 on the US R&B charts with his remix of Back in the Day, it doesn't appear as if any follow-up single was ever issued.
Cause you gotta be,
If it was, it certainly didn't break into the top 100. Maybe Ahmad just didn't fit in alongside the likes of Warren G, Coolio, Snoop Dogg, and Wu-Tang Clan, all of whom had better remembered singles on the rap charts at the time. For heaven's sake, there's a song on his album where he straight up admits that the reason why he didn't join a gang is because his mom wouldn't let him.
Used to do it like this and like that and like this, but since she never let me join the gang, I couldn't G-Thing.
Unless you're going for some kind of comedy rap career, that just wasn't going to get you very far in the mid-90s. As for recording a follow-up album, in this case, it just didn't happen. According to Ahmad, it would have been a more spiritual affair, putting it even further outside the box of gangstas, guns, and glamour concerns that would dominate rap songs during the decade. Apparently, the record company was so unhappy with how upfront he was with his Christian values on this album that they never released it. Still, Back in the Day was well remembered and enjoyed a fruitful afterlife. Among other things, it was used in the advertising for the nostalgic 1999 film The Wood.
we should play this game for life.
I'm glad he got you guys for friends.
Yeah, I like that.
As well as later being sampled and interpolated by Mariah Carey, Travie McCoy, and J. Cole. But even with all the fondness that people had for this song, it's not like it was a big enough hit for Ahmad to just live on. Frustrated by his experience with the major label, Ahmad started Look Alive Records in the late 90s, and then formed a progressive alternative hip-hop band with his then wife Tina Jones called Fourth Avenue Jones. This group released a bunch of albums in the 2000s, one of them on Interscope, before breaking up in 2005. Part of his decision to end the group had to do with wanting to provide his infant son with a more stable home life. With his music career seemingly on the back burner, Ahmad decided to focus on higher education instead, eventually being accepted to Stanford University in 2008, after being named valedictorian of his graduate class at Long Beach City College, to pursue a PhD in social welfare. Somehow he also managed to finish his second album, The Death of Me, which finally saw release in 2010 to generally positive reviews. Since then, he's worked off and on as a guest rapper, songwriter, author, and motivational speaker. AllMusic's bio claims that he's also worked on stuff from LMFAO, so if that's true, I guess there's no bad blood between him and Kendall Gordy for the way that things went down back in the 90s. After learning as much as I have about Ahmad's story, the fact that he became a motivational speaker rings 100% true to me. If you need some motivation, you don't want to just hear from someone who's tasted success. You want to hear from someone who's also faced major obstacles and setbacks and still found a way to get back up and thrive. Ahmad's career was filled with ups and downs, but thanks to his determination, work ethic, and philosophy of positivity, he was able to weather the changes and reinvent himself over time, to the point where I just have to consider him a success story, regardless of how his music career turned out. How many rappers do you think get famous at 18 and still manage to turn out as functional as this? Too often in music, I think we tend to glorify the famous musicians whose life stories read as tragedy, whether they burn out too quickly or just never quite get it all together, because nothing is stronger than the allure of what could have been. The natural result of this is that over the years we've reinforced a lot of harmful attitudes about the way that art is made and the kind of people that make it. Well, I propose a counter-narrative, and that is that we put more time into celebrating those individuals who just kept on doing the best they could, whether anyone ever noticed or not. Ahmad could have easily just become another sad washout, someone who you read about ending up in rehab or humiliating themselves on celebrity gimmick reality shows years later. Instead, he found another path, went to work for it, and is probably much happier and more fulfilled for it than he ever would have been if he just kept on chasing that high from his brief time in the spotlight. As he says on his song Ordinary People, it's those who work hard is the superstars.
2, 4, 6, 8, I guess that I appreciate and consider the niggas who work hard as the superstars.
I'm Jacob, and this was Rad 90s Music. I'll see you sometime in the future.